Said. Greetings, everyone. I am Kasik Minwam of the Kairi and Alubera Indigenous peoples, and I am here just to give a quick update. I was asked to give a better clarification on, on certain aspects of the Indigenous. I usually stay out these type of things because there's a bunch of a bunch of crazy talk and crazy people who pick up things about the Indigenous, and then they misrepresent it in the most shameful way possible. But just for better clarification, I'll stay away from the name callings, the calling of people name and thing. We just want to clarify a couple of points, right? What it means to be Indigenous. Indigenous is the original people who were on the land first and basically the planet, right? With that said, there is only one way Indigenous people could look, and that is like me. Everybody else who has some degree of people looking like me in their bloodline would look slightly differently and could also claim Indigenous heritage, right? But they are mixed Indigenous people. The copper tone, woolly hair, Indigenous is the original to the Americas. That's one, right? Everything else is children and grandchildren, as we like to clarify. We have respect where respect is given, and where the children them are respect for the parents, we acknowledge, right? Another thing, boom, right? An Indigenous being in reality cannot be a citizen, right? Or any corporation. If you're Indigenous means that you heal the struggles that your ancestors did from how much years ago, that they fought and stood up against the invaders and colonizers who came and set up these corporations on these islands, and they start to call the islands by the name of the corporations, i.e. Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, St. Vincent, Barbados. All these are corporate names and do not exist. They are not real entities, right? So the memes that they're talking about, Trinidad is not a real place, Jamaica is not, none of these things are real places. They are real corporations, right? So as per what happening here on Kairi, right? You could be a chief of Trinidad and Tobago, but that has nothing to do with Indigenous peoples. Indigenous people does not recognize Trinidad or Tobago. We recognize Kairi and Alubera. That is one. Indigenous people do, as I said before, Indigenous people do not carry any citizenship. A citizen is a corporate entity, a dead entity that has no rights or no standing at law, right? That is two. What's another point? Right, certain groups who claiming that they are the group that the government need to negotiate with, they are also a part of the nonsense, because Trinidad and Tobago, the entity, is an invading illegal terrorist organization on Indigenous people land, Kairi and Alubera. So if you claim that you're Indigenous and then you go now to negotiate with the invaders, then you would be showing the colors that your ancestors show. Hence the reason why tribal wars start. When they first came in as invaders, you sold out, right? So there is no negotiation to be had with the colonizers, right? So from the time you want to have a negotiation with the colonizers, you are part of the problem, right? So the other point is, if you're Indigenous, you need no validation from no one, right? Especially a corporate entity. You probably need validation from another existing tribe who have made themselves such known by different routes. And I never wrote them down, never will write them down, nor will I tell anybody, because of this same nonsense and bandwagon is that happening right now on the island. We have a set of people fighting for the corporation of Trinidad and Tobago, enacted by Elizabeth II in 1976, who said be, and so it was. That's how Trinidad came about, or how it was ratified, right? Prior to that, it was just a name called by the Spanish invaders on them, and it was never really officialized until the British them came in and they officialized the company operating on indigenous people land. So all these bandwagoners who fighting over chief at Trinidad and Tobago are misrepresenting what indigenous really means, right? So indigenous needs no validation from the corporate colonizers who are here illegally anyway, understood by the international court, right? And they can't give any validation anyway. Furthermore, no indigenous group could go to international court, right, to get an injunction to stop a man from declaring himself whatever he wants to declare himself, right? Furthermore, seeking international court to stop a man from expressing himself is also outside an indigenous way of thinking. There's an indigenous tribunal, there's an indigenous court. There are indigenous groups together already forming a federation, right? So, there are places where we could go and get remedy and recourse, and this is how indigenous people deal with matters on that level. Anytime we're dealing with things that involves the corporate entity, the defunct governments that are on our lands, because they are a corporate entity, that's when we engage the international court, right? And no other reason why. So this set of noise and nonsense hearing, way after we 7 years later done announce all these things and put these things out in the public domain, right, is just an attempt at the corporate entities to guide the attention from who the true indigenous people are, right? First to begin with, if you're not like me, you mix 95% of Kairi indigenous, right? If you're not like me, you mix indigenous, right? So then now, fighting for a title over all indigenous and you're watered down indigenous, yeah, maybe you should try learning some more history about who the indigenous were, and you'd see that the colonizers who came, they look just like me, and they infiltrate and came out here, right? And brought other people over here, as we already recorded and put on YouTube and all that type of stuff. And those are the ones who brought the ones from Caucasus Mountains when they trained them and gave them 3 degrees of living to live, so that they wouldn't be walking on all fours no more and eating filth and that type of stuff. When they brought them across, that's where they had that type of so quote unquote light skin mixing, right? Prior to that, it was woolly head, melaninite devils who was doing the colonizing. Christopher Columbus was woolly head. He is Fernando Zaco. That's his real name. Cristobal Colon, they know him as. What's the next thing? And I just running through because I just really do want to be a part of your discussion. So I just running some stuff through. So the people who really interested could go and check out what I'm saying and see that all these people who doing all this thing is just a front, probably government funded or government initiated to take the pity away from the real indigenous, right? The real indigenous people declare themselves indigenous, distance yourself from the corporation via the bird paper. Your bird paper is a receipt that you were sold, and you go and live indigenous. No need for no validation from nobody. We produce our own documents. We have our own driver's license. Well, not a driver's license, but what you would call a driver's license. We have our own travel card. We have our own insurance, right? So we do things out of our own selves, for our own selves, and need no validation from no one. So I hope this would suffice, lady, right? But that's really the truth about what really happening with indigenous. If I know indigenous chief over Trinidad and Tobago, that is how they call it by it's just not possible. Trinidad and Tobago and indigenous do mix, right? Corporate and indigenous do mix. You can't mix the two because one used to kill we ancestors and the other used to stand up against the ones who killing we ancestors. So how we gonna mix two of them now? Right? So I think I cover everything. All right. If you miss anything, I'll probably just do a next update. Is everything right now? All right, beautiful. Right. So, all right. Those of you who have enough sense, go check out what I'm saying and forget the noise. All these people are what you call yardman terminology, wagoners, right? Prior to some years ago, before they realized we could come outside of the system and the indigenous people above the common rules of the corporation, then they now get interested. But we, Kairi and Alubera indigenous peoples, is the pioneers of that first. All our information is copyright, and anybody out there found with our information without our permission, we will be taking action to the full extent, right? So that should be about it. Yeah. So Wadu, I am Kasik Minwab of the Kairi and Alubera indigenous peoples. Peace out.